The lawyer's office smelled like old leather and disappointment. I sat there, 23 years old, holding a pen that felt heavier than it should, about to sign away the last connection I had to my mother. The document in front of me would transfer all rights to her estate, what little there was to my stepfather Richard and his twin daughters, Madison and Mackenzie. They sat across from me, barely concealing their impatience. Madison kept checking her phone, probably calculating how quickly they could sell Mom's things. Mackenzie filed her nails, the sound scraping against my nerves. Richard didn't even pretend to look sad anymore. "Just sign it, Sophia," Richard said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of barely restrained irritation. "Your mother left nothing of value anyway. Just some old furniture and those worthless paintings she was always working on. You're doing the right thing, letting the family who actually took care of her handle this. The family who actually took care of her." The words stung exactly as he intended them to, as if I hadn't spent every summer, every holiday, every free moment I could steal from college by her side. As if I hadn't been the one holding her hand through chemo treatments while Richard was too busy with work, and the twins were too sensitive to see her like that. I positioned the pen on the signature line. My hand trembled slightly. Not from emotion, I told myself, but from the 3 cups of coffee I'd had that morning, trying to prepare myself for this moment. The pen touched the paper, and I began to write S. And then, nothing. The ink stopped flowing. I pressed harder. Nothing. I scribbled in the corner of the page. The pen was completely dry. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Madison sighed dramatically. "Can someone get her a working pen? Some of us have actual places to be today." The lawyer, Mr. Brennan, fumbled through his desk drawers. "I'm so sorry. I was certain this pen was new. Let me find another—" As he searched, I absently turned the pen over in my hands. It was an expensive-looking thing, heavy and gold-plated, with an ornate design I hadn't noticed before. Something about it seemed familiar. The weight, the way it fit in my hand. My heart skipped. This wasn't just any pen. This was Mom's pen, the one she always used for what she called her important documents, the one that had supposedly gone missing weeks before she died. "Where did this pen come from?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Brennan looked up from his drawer, searching. "That one? Mr. Whitmore brought it. Said it was your mother's and thought it would be poetic, I suppose, for you to use it." I looked at Richard. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of satisfaction maybe, or was it nervousness? "How thoughtful of you, Richard," I said, slowly, still turning the pen in my hands. At the base, near where you'd unscrew it to refill the ink, I felt something. Tiny grooves, almost imperceptible. Letters? No. Numbers, etched so finely you'd never notice unless you were really looking. If you're invested in finding out what those numbers meant and how they changed everything, make sure to stick around. This story has twists you won't see coming, and I promise you'll want to hear how a girl everyone dismissed as worthless became the one holding all the cards. My name is Sophia Chen, though for most of my life that name meant nothing to anyone. Not to my stepfamily, who saw me as an inconvenience they had to tolerate. Not to my mother's friends, who whispered behind their hands about poor Elena's daughter from her first marriage. Not even to myself, really. I had learned to be invisible, to take up as little space as possible, to apologize for existing in rooms where I wasn't wanted. But let me back up, because to understand why I was sitting in that lawyer's office, ready to sign away everything, you need to understand the 23 years that led me there. My father died when I was 2. I have no memories of him, just a few faded photographs my mother kept hidden in places Richard wouldn't look. She remarried when I was 5, Richard Whitmore, a man who seemed charming and generous when he was courting my mother, but who turned cold the moment the wedding rings were exchanged. He brought with him twin daughters from his previous marriage, Madison and Mackenzie, who were 3 years older than me, and who made it clear from day one that I was not their sister, would never be their sister, and that any love or attention I received was theft from what rightfully belonged to them. My mother tried. God knows she tried. She'd pull me aside when Richard wasn't looking, smooth my hair, whisper that she loved me. But she was fighting a losing battle. Richard controlled the money, his money, as he never tired of reminding us. My mother had been a struggling artist when they met, barely making ends meet as a single mom. Richard had swooped in like a savior, promising to take care of us both. But his care came with conditions, and those conditions seemed to multiply every year. "Sophia doesn't need new school clothes," he'd say, when Mom would tentatively bring up my worn-out sneakers or too small winter coat. "The twins' hand-me-downs are perfectly fine. We need to be smart about money, Elena. Madison and Mackenzie have their futures to think about." Their futures. Always their futures. The twins were enrolled in private school while I attended the underfunded public school across town. They had tutors, music lessons, dance classes, study abroad programs. I had the public library and whatever knowledge I could scrape together on my own. When I managed to get a scholarship to college, a full ride to State University for engineering, Richard's only response was, "Well, at least you won't be a financial burden anymore." The twins were crueler in more personal ways. They had this game they liked to play called Where's Sophia, where they'd plan elaborate family outings and somehow forget to tell me. I'd come home from school to an empty house, a note on the counter saying they'd gone to the beach or the amusement park or out for a special dinner. "Oh, Sophia," Madison would say when they returned, her voice dripping with false surprise. "We looked everywhere for you. Where were you hiding?" "She's always hiding," Mackenzie would add with a smirk. "Like a little mouse. Maybe that's what we should call her, Mouse." The nickname stuck. Even Richard started using it, though he pretended it was affectionate. "How's our little mouse doing?" he'd ask at dinner, not really expecting an answer, already turning his attention back to the twins' chatter about their days. My mother saw it all. I know she did. But she was trapped too, in her own way. Richard had systematically isolated her from her friends, convinced her that her art was a waste of time, made her entirely dependent on him financially. By the time she realized what kind of man she'd married, it was too late. She was sick by then. The cancer diagnosis came when I was 17, and she needed his health insurance, his money for treatment. Those last 6 years were the hardest, and yet, in some ways, the best. Because when Mom got sick, Richard showed his true colors so clearly that even she couldn't deny them anymore. He was too busy to take her to chemo. The twins were too sensitive to visit her in the hospital. But I was there. Every single day that I could manage it, I was there. I'd sneak into her hospital room with art supplies hidden in my backpack. We'd spend hours painting together, her teaching me techniques she'd learned in art school before life got in the way. She'd tell me stories about my father, about their whirlwind romance, about how he'd believed in her art when no one else did. She'd tell me about the future she'd dreamed of for me. "You're stronger than you know, Sophia," she'd say, her hands shaking as she guided my brush strokes. "You have gifts that no one can take away from you. Promise me you'll use them. Promise me you won't let them make you small." I promised her, even though I didn't believe it. How could I be strong when I'd spent my entire life being told I was nothing? How could I have gifts when everything I did was dismissed as inadequate compared to the twins' achievements? The last real conversation I had with Mom was 3 weeks before she died. She was having a good day, more lucid than she'd been in weeks. Richard had just left after a perfunctory 5-minute visit, and she gripped my hand with surprising strength. "The studio," she whispered urgently. "My old studio, in the basement, behind the wine racks." "Mom, the studio was converted to a gym years ago." "Richard." "No." Her eyes were fierce. "The real studio. The one he doesn't know about, behind the wine racks. Remember the pen, Sophia? The one your father gave me. Remember the numbers." I tried to get more out of her, but the moment passed. The nurse came in with medication, and Mom drifted back into the fog that claimed more and more of her days. When I tried to bring it up again later, she looked at me blankly, as if she had no idea what I was talking about. She died 2 weeks later. Richard waited exactly 3 days after the funeral before he started talking about settling her affairs. There was no will, he said. Mom had been too sick, too confused in her final months to make one. As her husband, everything defaulted to him. But he was willing to be generous, he said. If I signed a simple document relinquishing any claim to her estate, he'd give me her jewelry box and a few of her paintings, the small ones that wouldn't sell for much anyway. It's more than fair, Madison had said, examining her manicure. I mean, legally, you're not even entitled to that. Richard's being incredibly generous considering. Considering what? Considering that I wasn't really family? Considering that I'd spent my entire life being treated like an unwanted guest in my own home? Considering that while they'd been living their perfect lives, I'd been holding my dying mother's hand? But I was tired, so tired. 23 years old and already exhausted by fighting for scraps of acknowledgement, for the right to exist in spaces that should have been mine. What was the point of fighting for some old furniture and paintings that would only remind me of everything I'd lost? So I agreed. I made the appointment with Richard's lawyer. I showed up to that office ready to sign it all away and finally be free of them. Free of the constant reminders that I didn't belong, had never belonged, would never belong. And then the pen ran out of ink. Those numbers etched into the base. They were so faint, so carefully hidden. As Mr. Brennan continued searching for another pen and Richard grew increasingly agitated, I memorized them. 07, 15, 89, 42. They could be anything, random numbers, a phone number, coordinates, but something in my gut, some instinct I'd inherited from my mother, told me they were important. You know what? I said suddenly, standing up. I just remembered I have somewhere to be. Richard's face flushed red. Sophia, sit down. We're finishing this today. Actually, we're not. I slipped Mom's pen into my pocket. I need a few days to think about this. Think about what? Mackenzie's voice was shrill. There's nothing to think about. You're getting more than you deserve as it is. Maybe, I said, moving toward the door. Or maybe not. I'll be in touch, Mr. Brennan. I left before any of them could stop me, Richard's angry voice following me down the hallway. My hands were shaking as I got into my beat-up Honda Civic, the one thing I'd bought with my own money, from working 3 jobs through college. The pen felt warm in my pocket, like it was alive, like it was trying to tell me something. I drove straight to the house. I still couldn't call it home, even after all these years. Richard's Mercedes wasn't in the driveway. He was probably still at the lawyer's office, raging about my disobedience. Good. That gave me time. The basement had been off limits to me for years. That's Daddy's space, the twins would say when we were younger, as if Richard had any interest in the wine collection he'd inherited from his father. He just liked having things that were his, spaces where I wasn't allowed. But Mom had said behind the wine racks, the real studio. I made my way down the stairs, my phone flashlight cutting through the darkness. The wine rack stood against the far wall, floor to ceiling, filled with bottles that were probably worth more than my car. I ran my hands along the edges, feeling for... what? A button? A lever? Then I remembered something. Mom used to have a specific way of organizing things. She was obsessive about patterns, about hidden meanings in plain sight. The numbers on the pen? What if they weren't random? What if they were instructions? 07, 15, 89, 42. I looked at the wine rack differently. What if the numbers were positions? 7th row, 15th bottle. I counted carefully and found it. A dusty Bordeaux from 1989, the year I was born. I pulled it out, and it came easily, too easily. It wasn't a real bottle. It was a handle. The entire wine rack swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a narrow doorway. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I stepped through into a room I never knew existed. The smell hit me first, oil paint and turpentine, exactly like Mom's clothes used to smell when I was little. I fumbled for a light switch and found one. The room illuminated and I gasped. It was a studio, but not just any studio. The walls were covered, floor to ceiling, with paintings. Not Mom's paintings, or at least not the Mom I knew. These were different. Professional, sophisticated, museum-quality pieces that took my breath away. And in the corner, stacked neatly, were dozens more canvases, each one wrapped in protective cloth. But that wasn't what made my knees weak. On the far wall was a painting I recognized. I'd seen it before in an art history textbook. Twilight's Embrace by Alexander Volkov, the reclusive Russian artist whose work sold for millions. One of his paintings had just broken records at Sotheby's, selling for $37 million. Except this painting had a signature in the corner that wasn't Alexander Volkov's. It was my mother's. I moved closer, my hands trembling. Next to her signature was a note, painted directly onto the canvas in tiny, precise letters. For my daughter, who will understand. I spun around, looking at the other paintings with new eyes. They were all signed A. Volkov, but now that I knew what to look for, I could see it. The brushwork, the use of color, the way light seemed to live inside the paint. It was all Mom. My mother wasn't just Elena Whitmore, failed artist dependent on her husband's charity. She was Alexander Volkov, one of the most celebrated artists of the contemporary era. But how? Why? I found the answer in a leather journal hidden in a desk drawer. Mom's handwriting dated just a month before she died. My dearest Sophia, if you're reading this, then you found the studio. You always were too smart for your own good, just like your father. He would be so proud of the woman you've become. You're probably wondering why. Why did I hide this? Why did I let Richard treat us the way he did when I had all this? The answer is complicated, but it starts with your father. David wasn't just my husband. He was my art dealer, my protector, the one who helped me create Alexander Volkov. You see, my love, the art world is not kind to women, especially not to young mothers. When I was starting out, galleries wouldn't even look at my work. But when David suggested we create a mysterious male artist, someone reclusive and enigmatic, suddenly everyone was interested. We built the myth together. Alexander Volkov, the Russian émigré who painted in secret, who never appeared in public, whose works were handled exclusively by David Chen's small but prestigious gallery. It was supposed to be temporary, just until I was established enough to reveal the truth. But then David died, and I was pregnant with you. And Richard appeared like an answer to prayers I hadn't even known I was praying. I was scared, Sophia, scared and alone and convinced I couldn't raise you on my own. So I married him, and I hid Alexander away. Richard never knew. How could he? He never cared enough about my art to really look at it. The paintings he saw me working on were deliberately mediocre, things I created to maintain my cover. The real work happened here, in this room he never knew existed. I kept painting as Alexander. The money went into accounts Richard didn't know about, investments in your name that he can't touch. Mr. Harrison at First National Bank has all the information. Account number 4289507. Yes, my darling, the same numbers on the pen, just rearranged. Your father gave me that pen on our wedding day, said it would write our future. He was right, just not in the way we expected. There's more, so much more. Authentication documents, correspondence with galleries, contracts. It's all in the safety deposit box at the bank. The key is hidden in the pen. Unscrew the bottom carefully. I should have been braver. I should have left Richard years ago, should have claimed my work, should have shown you that we didn't need him. But I was a coward, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for all the years you felt small, unwanted, less than. You were never any of those things. You were my masterpiece, Sophia, the only creation that truly mattered. The paintings in this room are yours. The money is yours. The legacy is yours, but more importantly, the truth is yours to do with as you wish. You can maintain the secret, revealing Alexander's works slowly to maximize their value. Or you can tell the world who Alexander Volkov really was. I trust your judgment completely. There's one more thing. The large painting in the back, the one covered with the black cloth. I painted it last month when I knew I was dying. It's my final work as Alexander, and perhaps his most valuable. It's called The Inheritance, and it's a portrait of you, painted from memory of all our moments together. Every brushstroke is a love letter, every color a wish for your future. Don't let them make you small anymore, my darling. You are the daughter of Elena Chen and David Chen. You are the heir to Alexander Volkov's legacy. You are an inheritance worth more than Richard Whitmore could ever imagine. All my love, Mom. P.S. Richard's wine collection is fake. I sold the real bottles years ago to fund my art supplies. The ones on the rack are elaborate reproductions, filled with colored water. I've been waiting for years for him to try to impress someone with a bottle and discover the truth. Consider it my final joke. I sat on the floor of that hidden studio and cried, really cried, for the first time since Mom's funeral. Not the polite, silent tears I'd learned to shed, but body-shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep inside. All those years of feeling worthless, of being told I was nothing, and the whole time my mother was one of the most celebrated artists in the world. All those times Richard had sneered at her hobby. He'd been living in the same house as millions of dollars worth of art. I found the key in the pen, just where Mom said it would be. A tiny thing, ingeniously hidden in a hollow compartment. I also found more than just paintings in that room. There were letters from gallery owners, begging for more of Alexander's work, reviews from critics calling him the most important artist of our generation, bank statements showing regular deposits that dwarfed Richard's supposed wealth. I spent 3 hours in that room, cataloging everything, taking photos, making sure I understood the full scope of what my mother had left me. Then I carefully closed it all up, making sure the wine rack looked undisturbed. Richard was waiting when I came upstairs, his face purple with rage. "Where the hell have you been?" he demanded. "You embarrassed me in front of my lawyer. You're going back there tomorrow to sign those papers, or you're out of this house tonight." I looked at him, really looked at him. This man who had made me feel like nothing for 18 years, who had treated my mother like a burden even as she was creating masterpieces in secret, who was about to learn exactly how wrong he'd been about everything. "You're right," I said calmly. "I'll go back tomorrow." He blinked, clearly not expecting me to capitulate so easily. "Good, and you'll apologize to Mr. Brennan for wasting his time." "Of course." Madison and Mackenzie appeared in the doorway, probably drawn by their father's shouting. They looked at me with identical smirks. "Finally coming to your senses, Mouse?" Madison asked. "Something like that." I went to my room, the small one in the attic that had been mine since the twins claimed the 2 larger bedrooms, and made a phone call. "First National Bank, how may I direct your call?" "I need to speak with Mr. Harrison, please. Tell him it's about account number 4289507. There was a pause, then, "One moment, please. I'll transfer you directly." Mr. Harrison was expecting my call. "Had been expecting it," he said, "for 6 years, ever since my mother had first gotten sick." He confirmed what the journal had said. There were multiple accounts, all in my name, all legally protected from Richard. The total amount made me dizzy. It wasn't just millions, it was tens of millions. And that was just the liquid assets, not counting the value of the paintings themselves. "Your mother was a very smart woman," Mr. Harrison said. "She made sure everything was ironclad. Mr. Whitmore has no claim to any of it." I made an appointment to see him the next morning, before the meeting with Richard's lawyer. Then I called someone else, Jonathan Hartley, the art dealer whose card I'd found in Mom's journal. He nearly had a heart attack when I told him I was Alexander Volkov's daughter and that I had access to previously unknown works. "How many paintings are we talking about?" he asked, his voice shaking with excitement. "At least 60, possibly more." The silence on the other end was so long, I thought he'd hung up. Then, 60? 60 unknown Volkovs? Do you understand what this means? The market value alone. We're talking about one of the most significant art discoveries of the century. I understood perfectly. The next morning, I arrived at the lawyer's office with my own legal team, 3 attorneys from one of the city's most prestigious firms, hired with a single phone call to Mr. Harrison. Richard's face went from smug to confused to alarmed as they filed in behind me. "What is this?" he demanded. "This," I said, pulling out a thick folder, "is a cease and desist order. You've been living in a house owned by the Elena Chen Trust for the past 6 years. My mother transferred ownership before she died, but allowed you to continue residing there out of kindness. That kindness ends today." "That's impossible. I bought that house." "No," my lead attorney, Ms. Rodriguez, said smoothly. "You bought it with money from your joint account. An account that Mrs. Chen was the primary contributor to through the sale of her artwork. We have documentation of every deposit, every sale, every transfer. The house, legally, is Ms. Chen's." Richard's lawyer, Mr. Brennan, was frantically flipping through documents. "This can't be right. Elena was a struggling artist. She had no money of her own." "Elena Chen," I said, standing up, "was Alexander Volkov." The silence in the room was absolute. Madison's phone clattered to the floor. Mackenzie's mouth hung open. Richard's face went from red to white so fast I thought he might faint. "You're lying," he whispered. "Am I?" I pulled out my phone and showed them the photos I'd taken in the hidden studio. 63 original Volkovs, all painted in the house you thought you owned, in a studio you never knew existed. The last Volkov sold at auction went for $37 million. Would you like to do the math on what 63 would be worth? But she was my wife. Half of everything she had is mine." "Actually," Ms. Rodriguez interjected, "you signed a postnuptial agreement 7 years ago when Mrs. Chen was first diagnosed. You insisted on it to protect your assets in case of her death. It clearly states that all individual assets acquired before and during the marriage remain separate property. You wanted to make sure she couldn't claim any of your wealth. Ironically, that same agreement means you can't claim hers." I watched Richard's world crumble in real time. The twins were staring at me like they'd never seen me before. Madison was actually calculating on her phone, her face growing paler with each number she typed. "The jewelry," Mackenzie said faintly. "The jewelry Dad said was fake, that Mom left to Sophia." "The Volkov collection," I confirmed. "Pieces my mother bought at auction to support other artists, all under anonymous bids. The sapphire necklace you laughed at? It's a Cartier from 1923. The costume earrings, they belonged to a Russian duchess." "But you can't just—" "We're family," Richard sputtered. "No," I said quietly, "we're not. We never were. You made that very clear every single day for 18 years. "Sophia, please," Madison said, and for the first time in our lives, she used my actual name. "We didn't know. If we had known? What? You would have treated me with basic human decency? You would have been kind to my dying mother? You would have seen me as a person instead of a mouse in your perfect house?" I turned to Mr. Brennan. "I believe we're done here. My attorneys will handle everything from now on." "Wait!" Richard stood up, his desperation palpable. "The wine collection, that's mine from my father." I couldn't help it. I laughed. "The wine collection? You mean the elaborate fakes my mother had made? She sold the real bottles years ago, Richard. You've been showing off colored water and fancy bottles to your business partners for over a decade." The look on his face was almost worth 18 years of pain. Almost. As I walked out, Mackenzie called after me. "What are you going to do? With the paintings, I mean?" I paused at the door. "I'm going to honor my mother's legacy. The world is going to know who Alexander Volkov really was. A woman who painted masterpieces while her husband told her she was wasting her time. A mother who built an empire in secret to protect her daughter's future. An artist who was so far ahead of her time that she had to hide behind a man's name to be taken seriously. And us?" Madison asked in a small voice. "What happens to us?" That's not my concern. You have 30 days to vacate the house. After that, my attorneys will handle the eviction proceedings. I left them there, in that office that smelled like old leather and now their own disappointment. As I walked to my car, I felt something I'd never felt before. Free. Completely. Utterly free. But the story doesn't end there. No, the real vindication came 6 months later, at the Guggenheim Museum in New York. The exhibition was called The Unmasking of Alexander Volkov, Elena Chen's Secret Masterpieces. Every major art critic, collector, and dealer in the world was there. The story had captivated the media. A struggling artist who secretly became one of the most celebrated painters of her generation, all while enduring an abusive marriage. The feminist angle, the art world deception, the dramatic revelation, it was everything the press loved. I stood in the main gallery, wearing a dress that cost more than Richard's car, not because I cared about expensive things, but because my mother deserved to have her daughter look the part at her triumph. The centerpiece of the exhibition was The Inheritance, the portrait Mom had painted of me. The museum had insured it for $50 million. Jonathan Hartley stood beside me, still in awe even after months of working with the collection. "The presale estimates are conservative," he said quietly. "We're looking at potentially $300 million for the entire collection." "I don't care about the money," I said, and I meant it. "I care that people know who she really was." "Oh, they know. The art world will never be the same. Every gallery that rejected her work as Elena Chen is scrambling to explain themselves. The systemic sexism she exposed, it's revolutionary." I saw them before they saw me. Richard, Madison, and Mackenzie standing at the entrance, being turned away by security. They weren't on the list. Richard was arguing, his face red, gesturing wildly. He was saying something about being Elena's husband, about having rights. Security wasn't impressed. Madison saw me first. Our eyes met across the gallery, and for a moment I saw something I'd never seen before, genuine remorse. She said something to her father, pulled on his arm. He shook her off, still arguing. Mackenzie was crying, her perfect makeup running. I could have let them in. One word from me and security would have stepped aside. The old Sophia, the mouse, would have done it, would have felt guilty about their pain, would have tried to make peace. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I turned, away, back to the portrait my mother had painted of me. In it, I wasn't the small, scared girl I'd always seen in the mirror. I was powerful, radiant, worthy. She had painted me the way she always saw me, even when I couldn't see it myself. "Ms. Chen?" A reporter from the Times approached. "Could you tell us about your plans for the future? Will you continue to release your mother's work?" "Yes," I said, "but I'm also establishing the Elena Chen Foundation for Struggling Female Artists. It will provide grants, studio space, and most importantly, the support to create art without having to hide who they are." "And what about your stepfamily? Have they been supportive of your decision to reveal your mother's identity?" I smiled, the kind of smile my mother used to give when she knew something no one else did. "My stepfamily is dealing with their own challenges right now. I wish them well." What I didn't say was that Richard's business had crumbled when news got out that he'd been living off his wife's secret fortune while treating her like a servant. His investors pulled out, his partners distanced themselves. The twins had to drop out of their expensive colleges when the money ran out. The last I heard, Madison was working as a receptionist and Mackenzie was living with her mother's relatives in Ohio. As for the house, I donated it to the foundation. It's now a residence for female artists, a place where they can create without fear, without having to make themselves small. The hidden studio is preserved as a museum, a reminder of what women have always been capable of, even when the world tried to convince them otherwise. The wine cellar was converted into a gallery space. We kept one of the fake bottles labeled with a placard that reads, "Even the wine was art." Standing in the Guggenheim that night, surrounded by my mother's work finally displayed for the world to see, I thought about that moment in the lawyer's office when the pen ran out of ink. Such a small thing, a minor inconvenience that should have meant nothing. But it meant everything. If that pen hadn't run dry, I would have signed those papers. I would have walked away with nothing but a few pieces of costume jewelry and some worthless paintings. Richard would have discovered the studio eventually, would have claimed it all as his own. The world would never have known that Alexander Volkov was Elena Chen. But the pen did run dry. The universe, or my mother's spirit, or maybe just dumb luck, intervened. I kept the pen, of course. It sits on my desk now, in my apartment overlooking Central Park, an apartment I bought with my own money, from my own inheritance, in my own name. Sometimes I pick it up, feel those tiny numbers etched into its surface, remember the moment everything changed. The foundation has helped over 200 artists in its first year. Some of them are young women escaping abusive relationships. Some are mothers who were told their art didn't matter as much as their domestic duties. Some are just talented people who needed someone to believe in them. I got a letter last week from one of them, a woman named Sarah who reminded me so much of my mother it hurt. She'd been painting in her garage at night after her husband and kids went to bed, hiding her canvases behind old furniture, convinced her work wasn't good enough to show anyone. "You saved my life," she wrote, "not just financially but spiritually. You showed me that my art matters, that I matter, that I don't have to hide." That's my mother's real legacy, not the millions of dollars, not the famous paintings, not even the vindication of revealing the truth. It's the permission she gave to every woman who's ever been told to make herself smaller, quieter, less than she is. The truth is, I could have handled things differently with Richard and the twins. I could have been generous, forgiving, the bigger person. I could have shared the wealth, kept the family together, smoothed things over. But why? Why should I have been the one to sacrifice, again, to make them comfortable? Why should their cruelty be rewarded with kindness they never showed? No. Sometimes the best revenge isn't living well. It's living honestly. It's refusing to pretend that abuse was love, that neglect was normal, that being treated like nothing was acceptable. My mother hid for too long, but she made sure I wouldn't have to. She gave me more than money or paintings. She gave me the power to say, I matter, I always mattered. And you were wrong about everything. The exhibition ran for 6 months and broke attendance records. 3 of Mom's paintings were acquired by the Metropolitan Museum of Art. 1 went to the Louvre. The inheritance hangs in my living room where I can see it every morning, a reminder of how she saw me when I couldn't see myself. I still paint, too. Not professionally. I'm not my mother's equal with a brush, but I paint because I love it, because it connects me to her, because I can. I paint in broad daylight, in a studio with floor-to-ceiling windows, signing my own name without fear or shame. Richard tried to contest the will one more time, claiming undue influence, mental incompetence, anything his lawyers could think of. The case was thrown out in preliminary hearings. The evidence was too overwhelming. Years of documentation, witnessed signatures, medical records showing Mom was of sound mind until the very end. He sent me a letter after that final legal defeat. I recognized his handwriting on the envelope and almost threw it away unopened. But curiosity won. Sophia, it read, I know you hate me, and perhaps you have reason to. But I loved your mother in my own way. I just didn't understand her. I didn't understand you. If I had known, well, things would have been different. I'm sorry. I kept the letter but didn't respond. Some apologies come too late, and some understanding is only born from loss. Madison reached out once, through Instagram. She'd seen a photo of me at a gallery opening, laughing with a group of artists the foundation supported. Her message was simple. You look happy. I'm glad. I didn't respond to her either, but I didn't block her. Maybe that's growth, or maybe I just don't care enough anymore to hold on to the anger. The twins' mother, Richard's first wife, contacted me last month. She wanted to thank me, oddly enough. Said that losing everything was the best thing that could have happened to her daughters. They were learning to be actual people, she said, not just pretty ornaments in their father's perfect life. Madison is in community college now, she told me. She's studying to be a teacher, and Mackenzie is working at a nonprofit. They're different girls now, humbler, kinder. You did that. No, I corrected her. Reality did that. I just showed them what reality looked like. The pen still doesn't write. I've never refilled it, never repaired it. It sits on my desk, beautiful and broken, a reminder that sometimes the most important messages come when the ink runs out, when the obvious path is blocked, when we're forced to look closer at what we're holding. My mother painted over 300 works as Alexander Volkov. We've released 60 so far, with the rest being unveiled slowly, carefully, to preserve their value and impact. Each new revelation makes headlines, keeps her story alive, ensures that Elena Chen's name will never be forgotten or dismissed again. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came just last week, at a dinner party hosted by one of New York's premier art collectors. I was seated next to an older man, a wine enthusiast who was going on and on about his collection. He mentioned offhandedly that he'd once been offered a bottle from the legendary Whitmore collection, but that the deal had fallen through when the family had some kind of scandal. "Oh," I said innocently, sipping my champagne. "I know about that collection. Fun fact, they were all fakes. The owner's wife replaced them with colored water years before anyone noticed." He laughed, thinking I was joking. "Imagine that, all those years, showing off fake wine, the embarrassment." "Yes," I agreed, smiling. "Imagine that. The truth is, I've won. I've won so completely that sometimes I can't quite believe it's real. I have money, respect, a purpose. I have my mother's legacy to protect and share. I have the satisfaction of knowing that every success I achieve, every artist I help, every painting that sells for millions, is a reminder to Richard and the twins of what they lost, what they never understood they had. But more than that, I have myself. For the first time in my life, I have myself, whole, unashamed, undiminished. I was the girl they called Mouse, the one they forgot to invite, forgot to love, forgot to see. I was the girl who almost signed it all away because I'd been convinced I deserved nothing more than scraps. Now I'm Sophia Chen, daughter of Elena Chen, protector of Alexander Volkov's legacy, founder of a foundation that changes lives. I'm the woman who owns the house they thought was theirs, who inherited the fortune they never knew existed, who holds the truth they never bothered to seek. The pen that revealed it all sits on my desk, a monument to the power of small moments, unexpected revelations, the messages that come when we think the ink has run dry. My mother knew somehow that I would figure it out. She trusted me with her secret, her art, her truth. And I've done what she couldn't do in life. I've claimed it all, loudly, proudly, without apology or explanation. Richard was wrong about so many things, but the thing he was most wrong about was this: I was never a mouse. I was a girl watching, learning, waiting. I was my mother's daughter, with art in my blood and steel in my spine, even when I didn't know it myself. The story spread beyond the art world. It became a symbol, a rallying cry for everyone who'd ever been dismissed, overlooked, underestimated. Women wrote to me with their own stories of talents hidden, dreams deferred, brilliance dimmed to make others comfortable. The foundation expanded to include grants for all artists from marginalized communities, for anyone who'd been told their voice didn't matter. At one event, a young woman approached me, tears in her eyes. She was maybe 19, holding a portfolio with shaking hands. "My stepmother says art is a waste of time," she said, "that I should study something practical. But I can't stop painting. It's like breathing to me." I looked at her work right there, in the middle of the gallery. It was good, raw, emotional, full of potential. But more than that, I saw in her eyes the same desperation I'd seen in the mirror for so many years. The need to be seen, to be validated, to be told that what you create matters. "What's your name?" I asked. "Amy." "Amy, Listen to me very carefully. Your art is not a waste of time. Your stepmother is wrong. And if she can't see your gift, that's her loss, not your failure. I gave her my card, connected her with the foundation. She's in art school now, full scholarship. Her stepmother's opinion irrelevant. That's the thing about vindication. It's not just about winning. It's about taking the power you've gained and using it to make sure others don't have to fight the same battles. Sometimes I dream about my mother. She's in her hidden studio, painting in the light instead of darkness. She's signing her real name boldly across the canvas. She turns to me and smiles, that secret smile she used to give me when Richard wasn't looking. "You did it, my darling," she says. "You found it all." And I had, not just the paintings or the money or the truth. I'd found myself, the person I was always meant to be before they tried to make me small. The pen that changed everything still sits on my desk. Sometimes young artists visit my office, grant recipients, scholarship winners, people whose lives the foundation has touched. They always ask about it, this ornate pen in a place of honor that obviously doesn't work. "Why keep a broken pen?" they ask. And I tell them, because sometimes the most important messages come when the ink runs out. Sometimes you have to look closer, dig deeper, refuse to sign your life away just because someone hands you a pen and tells you it's the only option. They nod like they understand, but they don't. Not really. How could they? How could anyone who hasn't lived it understand what it's like to go from nothing to everything in the span of a moment, to discover that the story you've been told your whole life was a lie? But maybe that's the point. Maybe we all have hidden studios in our lives, secret inheritances waiting to be discovered. Maybe we all have pens that need to run out of ink before we can see what's really written on them. I think about Richard sometimes, about what he must feel knowing that for all those years, he was living with one of the greatest artists of our time and never knew it. He mocked her paintings, dismissed her work, treated her passion as a silly hobby, and all the while she was creating masterpieces in secret, building a fortune he couldn't touch, leaving a legacy that would outlast his name by centuries. The ultimate irony? He's in the history books now, but not the way he wanted. He's a footnote in my mother's story, the husband who was too blind to see genius when he lived with it, too arrogant to recognize brilliance when it was painting in his basement. The twins, to their credit, have never tried to profit from their connection to the story. They could have sold interviews, written tell-all books, claimed they always knew something was special about their stepmother, but they've stayed silent. Maybe it's shame. Maybe it's growth. Maybe it's just the understanding that some stories aren't theirs to tell. I saw Madison once more, about a year after the exhibition. I was in a coffee shop reading applications for the Foundation's latest grant cycle. She walked in, saw me, froze. For a moment, I thought she'd leave, but she walked over, stood awkwardly by my table. "Hi, Sophia." "Madison." I wanted to say something. I've wanted to say it for a while. I gestured to the chair across from me. She sat down carefully, like she was afraid it might break under the weight of our history. "We were horrible to you," she said without preamble. "Mackenzie and I, we were cruel and petty and, God, we were so wrong. About everything. About you, about your mom, about what mattered." I set down my pen, a different pen, one that worked. "Yes, you were." She flinched but continued. "I'm in therapy now, trying to understand why I was like that, why we were like that. The therapist says it was learned behavior, that we were modeling what we saw from our father. But that's not an excuse. We were old enough to know better." "Yes, you were." "I'm sorry," she said, and for the first time in our lives, she seemed to mean it. "I'm so sorry for all of it, for calling you mouse, for excluding you, for making you feel like you didn't belong in your own home, for not seeing how amazing your mom was, for not seeing how amazing you were." I studied her face. She looked different, older, obviously, but also softer somehow, like the harsh edges that had defined her for so long had been worn away. "I don't forgive you," I said honestly. "I don't know if I ever will. You and Mackenzie and Richard, you stole something from me that I can never get back. You made me spend my childhood believing I was worthless. You made my mother's last years harder than they needed to be. That damage doesn't just disappear because you've had a change of heart." Tears were running down her face, but she nodded. "I know. I understand. But," I continued, "I'm glad you're in therapy. I'm glad you're trying to be better. Not for me. I don't need anything from you anymore. But for you. For whoever comes into your life next, they deserve better than the person you were." She stood up to leave, then paused. "The foundation. What you're doing for artists. Your mom would be so proud." "She is proud," I corrected. "Wherever she is proud." Madison left, and I never saw her again. But I heard things through the grapevine. She became a teacher, like her mother had said, elementary school, art class. She tells her students that art matters, that creativity is important, that everyone has something valuable to create. Maybe she learned something after all. The pen, my mother's pen, has become something of a legend in the art world. There's been talk of putting it in a museum, of making it part of the permanent Elena Chen Alexander Volkov collection. But I'm not ready to let it go. It's my talisman, my reminder, my connection to the moment everything changed. Sometimes when I'm struggling with a decision about the foundation or feeling overwhelmed by the responsibility of managing my mother's legacy, I hold that pen. I run my fingers over those hidden numbers, remember the wine rack sliding open, the studio revealing itself, the truth coming to light. It reminds me that the biggest revelations often come disguised as small inconveniences. That sometimes we need to be forced to stop, to look closer, to refuse to sign our lives away on someone else's terms. My mother couldn't claim her truth in life. She was too afraid, too trapped, too convinced that the world wouldn't accept Elena Chen the way it embraced Alexander Volkov. But she made sure I could claim it for her. She left me breadcrumbs, clues, a trail that led from a dry pen to a fortune in art, to a truth that changed everything. I think about the 19-year-old girl I was at her funeral, standing in a black dress I'd bought at a thrift store because Richard said spending money on funeral clothes was wasteful. I was so broken then, so convinced that I was about to be cast out into a world that had no place for me. I had no idea that my mother had already saved me, had been saving me for years in secret, painting my freedom one masterpiece at a time. The last painting she ever completed, the one she painted in those final weeks when she could barely hold a brush, hangs in my bedroom. It's not one of the Volkovs. This one is signed with her real name. It's a simple piece, just a window looking out onto a garden, light streaming through curtains that seem to move despite being frozen in paint. But if you look closely, really closely, you can see it. In the pattern of the light, in the way the shadows fall, there are words painted so subtly you'd miss them if you didn't know to look. My darling daughter, you were always enough. I was always enough, even when they called me Mouse, even when they forgot I existed, even when I believed their version of my story, I was always enough. The pen that revealed it all, that refused to write the lie they wanted me to sign, sits on my desk as I write this. It's a reminder that sometimes the universe intervenes in the smallest ways, that sometimes salvation comes not from the ink that flows, but from the ink that doesn't. Richard Whitmore thought he was keeping me in my place by making me small. Madison and Mackenzie thought they were protecting their territory by pushing me out. They all thought they were the main characters in this story, with me as a footnote, a minor inconvenience, a mouse in the walls of their perfect life. They were wrong. I was the heir all along, not just to money or paintings, but to a legacy of resilience, creativity, and the kind of strength that builds empires in secret while others sleep. My name is Sophia Chen. I am the daughter of Elena Chen, the woman who was Alexander Volkov. I am the keeper of 63 masterpieces and counting. I am the founder of a foundation that has already changed hundreds of lives. I am the woman who inherited everything while they inherited nothing but the consequences of their own cruelty. And I am no longer anyone's mouse. The story could end here, with vindication achieved and justice served. But life, unlike fiction, doesn't stop at the satisfying conclusion. It keeps going, bringing new challenges and unexpected revelations. 6 months after my encounter with Madison in the coffee shop, I received a call from a lawyer in Switzerland, not Richard's lawyer, not anyone I knew. He introduced himself as representing the estate of David Chen, my father. "That's impossible," I said. "My father died when I was 2. His estate was settled decades ago." "David Chen did die when you were 2, the lawyer agreed. "But his father, your grandfather, whom you never met, died last month. He left something for you." I had never known my father's family. Mom had told me they disapproved of the marriage, that they'd cut David off when he married her. After he died, they wanted nothing to do with us. The lawyer sent me documents. My grandfather, Chen Wei-lin, had been watching from afar my entire life. He'd known about the abuse, about Richard, about my mother's secret identity as Alexander Volkov. He'd known everything and done nothing. His letter explained why. "My dear granddaughter, by the time you read this, you will have already discovered your mother's secret and claimed your inheritance. I know this because I have been watching, waiting, ensuring that the plan Elena and I put in place years ago would come to fruition. You must hate me for my absence, for allowing you to suffer when I could have intervened. But your mother and I agreed. You needed to be strong enough to handle the truth when it came. If I had swooped in, played the rescuing grandfather, you would have been saved, but not strengthened. You would have inherited wealth, but not wisdom. Your mother was the strongest woman I ever knew. When David died, I was destroyed. I blamed her, unfairly, but she came to me when she was diagnosed, told me about Alexander, about her plan for you. We reconciled in secret. I've been managing parts of the Volkov fortune from Switzerland, ensuring Richard could never accidentally discover it. But there's more. Your father wasn't just an art dealer. He was an artist too, like your mother. His works are in a vault in Geneva, never shown, never sold. There are over 100 paintings, all signed with a pseudonym he and your mother created together, Alexandra Chen. Yes, they were planning even then to merge their names, their talents, their legacies. These paintings are now yours, along with the gallery in Geneva, the apartment in Paris, and the villa in Tuscany where your parents spent their honeymoon, where they dreamed of raising you surrounded by art and love and light. I'm sorry I wasn't there for your childhood, but I've been here all along, making sure that when the time came, you would have everything you needed to not just survive, but triumph. Your father would be so proud, as am I, your grandfather, Chen Wei-lin. The vault in Geneva held treasures beyond imagination. Not just my father's paintings, which were brilliant, a perfect complement to my mother's work, but photographs I'd never seen. My parents together, young and in love, painting side by side. Me as a baby, held between them, already reaching for their brushes. A whole history I never knew existed. There was also a journal, written jointly by my parents in the months before I was born. Their hopes for me, their dreams, their plans. One entry, in my mother's handwriting, stood out. If anything happens to us, I want Sophia to know that she was created from love and art in equal measure. She is our masterpiece, the only collaboration that truly matters. I hope she inherits our talents, but more than that, I hope she inherits our courage to create fearlessly, to love deeply, to never let anyone dim her light. Below it, in my father's handwriting, she will be magnificent. I know it. Even if I'm not there to see it, she will be magnificent. I stood in that vault in Geneva, surrounded by the art my parents created together, and wept. Not from sadness, but from a kind of completion I hadn't known I was missing. All those years of feeling like I didn't belong, and here was proof that I was exactly who I was meant to be. The daughter of two artists who loved each other and me more than I ever knew. The revelation of the Alexandra Chen collection sent the art world into another frenzy. The story became even more incredible. Not just one secret artist, but two, a couple creating masterpieces while the world had no idea. The paintings, when displayed together with the Volkovs, told a story of love and partnership that transcended death. I kept the villa in Tuscany. It's where I go when I need to paint, when I need to feel close to them. The walls are covered with their work and with mine, because I do paint now, seriously, without fear. I'm not as talented as they were, but I'm getting better. And I sign my own name, Sophia Chen, boldly across every canvas. Richard tried one more time to insert himself into the narrative when the news about my grandfather broke. He gave an interview to a tabloid, claiming he'd always known there was more to Elena's story, that he'd supported her art, that our family's tragedy was being misrepresented. Nobody believed him. The evidence was too overwhelming, the true story too well documented. The interview became a joke, memes spreading across social media mocking his desperate attempts to rewrite history. "I always knew my wife was a genius," became a punchline, accompanied by screenshots of his old social media posts dismissing her hobby. The twins maintained their silence, and for that, I was grateful. Whatever growth they'd experienced, at least they'd learned that some stories weren't theirs to tell, some spotlights weren't theirs to claim. The foundation has expanded internationally now. We have residencies in Geneva, Paris, New York, and Tuscany. We've supported over 1,000 artists, with more applications coming in every day. Each success story feels like a small victory for my mother, for every woman who was ever told her art didn't matter. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came just last month. A package arrived at my office, no return address, just a Swiss postmark. Inside was a painting I'd never seen before, clearly my mother's work, but different from her usual style. It was a self-portrait, but she'd painted herself split in two. One half in shadow, hidden, painting in darkness. The other half in brilliant light, bold and unashamed. There was a note attached in handwriting I didn't recognize. "Your mother gave this to me before she died, asked me to send it. To you, when I felt the time was right. She said you'd understand what it meant. She said to tell you that both halves were necessary. The shadow taught her to appreciate the light. But she wanted you to live entirely in the light, to never have to hide who you are. A friend from the shadows." No signature, no explanation. I've tried to trace where it came from, but the trail goes cold. Someone out there knew my mother's secret while she was alive, kept it, protected it, and honored her wishes even after death. I hung the painting in the foundation's main gallery with a placard that reads, "The artist is both shadow and light, but her daughters, biological and spiritual, deserve to create in full sun." Every day, young artists walk past that painting on their way to studios we provide, supplies we've funded, dreams we're helping to build. They don't all know the full story. They don't need to. They just need to know that someone believes their art matters, that their voices deserve to be heard, that they don't have to hide who they are to succeed. The pen still sits on my desk. I've been offered millions for it. Collectors want to own the object that started it all, the pen that refused to sign a lie and revealed a truth. But it's not for sale. It never will be. Sometimes I pick it up when I'm signing contracts for the foundation, a little ritual that reminds me of how far we've come, from a girl about to sign away her rights to a woman signing checks that change lives, from a mouse in the walls to the owner of the house, from being told I was nothing to knowing I was everything my parents dreamed I would be. The story spread beyond the art world, beyond even the feminist movement. It became a universal tale of hidden strength, of patient revenge, of the truth ultimately coming to light. Books have been written about it, documentaries made. Hollywood wants to turn it into a movie. I've said no to all of it. This story is mine to tell, when and how I choose, but I do tell it in my own way. Every scholarship granted, every artist supported, every young woman who walks into our foundation feeling small and walks out knowing she's capable of greatness. That's me telling the story. That's my mother's legacy living on. Richard's business never recovered. The last I heard, he was working as a consultant for a small firm in the Midwest, his reputation too damaged for anything more prestigious. The twins have built their own lives, separate from his shadow. Madison teaches art to underprivileged children. Mackenzie works for a nonprofit that supports victims of domestic abuse. Maybe they learn something from all of this. Maybe pain can be a teacher if we let it. I don't hate them anymore. Hate takes too much energy, and I have better things to do with mine. I have art to create, artists to support, a legacy to protect and expand. I have a life to live, fully, boldly, in the light my parents always wanted for me. The villa in Tuscany has become a retreat for artists who need to rediscover their voices. I go there 4 times a year, teach masterclasses, paint alongside people who remind me of my mother, talented, desperate to create, but somehow convinced they don't deserve to. Last month, while teaching there, a student asked me the question I get asked most often. How did you know to look closer at the pen? What made you see those numbers? I thought about it, really thought about it. The truth is, I almost didn't. I almost handed it back, accepted another pen, signed my life away, but something stopped me. Maybe it was my mother's spirit. Maybe it was my father's. Maybe it was just 23 years of being underestimated finally reaching a breaking point. I looked closer, I told the student, because for the first time in my life, something felt wrong about giving up. I'd been taught to be small, to accept less, to not make waves. But holding that pen, being asked to sign away the last connection to my mother, something in me said no. Sometimes the most important moment of your life is when you decide to stop accepting the story others have written for you. She nodded, understanding flickering in her eyes. Later, I saw her painting with a new boldness, signing her name larger than before. That's all we can do, really. Sign our names larger, refuse to be erased, look closer when something feels wrong. Trust that sometimes the universe conspires to help us, even if it's just through a pen running out of ink at exactly the right moment. End. Thank you for listening to my story. If this story moved you, and if you believe that everyone deserves to have their true worth seen, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Comment below. And tell me, what was the moment in the story that resonated with you the most? And if you want more powerful stories about finding your strength and overcoming the odds, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's next.